There's a moment in every trader's journey when the chart stops being about numbers and starts becoming a mirror that reflects not the market, but the mind behind it. This episode isn't about profit or loss. It's about what happens between those two states, the fragile space where discipline dissolves and emotion takes command. You'll hear about a single session on NASDAQ futures. A day that began with clarity drifted into tilt and ended not in victory, but in awareness. Because trading isn't just about strategy. It's about the human nervous system, about fear disguised as control and ego disguised as confidence. And when we lose ourselves in the noise, sometimes it takes two alarms to remember who's really making the decisions. This is case number 06, futures NQ, tilt to flat in two alarms. Welcome to Mind Over Markets. I remember that morning with perfect clarity, not because it was extraordinary, but because it began as every ordinary day before a psychological storm usually does, calm, structured, predictable. The market hadn't opened yet. Futures were hovering quietly, like the pause before an argument you know is coming. I had my coffee, my charts, my plan. I'd slept well. Everything appeared to align for what I thought would be a focused, disciplined session. Discipline. That word used to mean control to me. Now, after years of trading, it means surrender. Surrender to structure, surrender to uncertainty, surrender to the truth that I cannot control what I most want to control. That morning, I was trading the NQ NASDAQ futures. The volatility was just enough to feel alive, not enough to feel threatened. I had two small wins, early, precise, and clean. The kind of trades that whisper to you, you've got it today. And it's always that whisper that begins the slide. Because every small win carries a hidden message. It starts convincing you that you can predict the future, that you can feel what's coming next. It's not arrogance at first, it's subtle, like the hum of dopamine beneath the surface. You don't notice it growing, you just notice the confidence, the relaxed shoulders, the rhythm in your clicking, and then it begins. You stop waiting for perfect confirmation, you start anticipating the move. You say to yourself, it's fine, I've seen this setup before. You enter a little early, you move your stop just a little wider, you convince yourself it's still discipline. But it isn't, it's belief. And belief is the most dangerous drug in trading. The chart moved against me, not violently, just enough to be uncomfortable. My rational mind whispered, cut it. You know better. But the emotional mind answered, wait. You know it's going to bounce. That's how it begins, the internal war between two versions of yourself, the one that sees reality and the one that can't accept it. The candle dropped further. I felt my breathing tighten, but I didn't move. My hands hovered over the mouse, paralyzed. There's a strange paralysis that happens when the ego is in control. It's not inaction, it's resistance. The resistance to being wrong. The resistance to letting go of a story your mind already married. So I held on. And when price hit my stop, I didn't let it execute. I moved it down, just a little, just enough to feel like I was still in control. Control, that illusion every trader chases until it destroys them. The chart moved again, another tick down, then another, and something inside me began to crack. I felt the anger rise disguised as determination. I whispered to myself, no, I'm not wrong. The market is just overextending. It'll reverse. That moment, that tiny, almost invisible shift from logic to emotion, is what I call the tilt trigger. It's not the loss itself that hurts. It's the death of your self-image as a rational trader. You stop defending your capital and start defending your identity. When I finally cut the trade, it wasn't because I accepted the loss. It was because the pain became unbearable. And like every trader caught in tilt, the next move was immediate: revenge. I re-entered the same symbol, same direction, double the size. It wasn't about the setup anymore. It was about redemption. And in that instant, I was no longer trading the market, I was trading my emotions. What most people don't realize is that tilt doesn't feel chaotic when you're in it. It feels righteous. It feels justified. You believe you're finally in sync with the market when in truth, you've completely lost touch with reality. My heart rate climbed. My palms were sweating. And somewhere in the background, I heard the first alarm go off. That alarm wasn't a market alert. It was one of the psychological checkpoints I'd built for myself, every hour a reminder to check in with my emotional state. I ignored it because in tilt awareness feels like a threat. You don't want to stop and reflect. You want to act to prove, to win back your control. But here's the cruel paradox of trading psychology. The moment you most need awareness is the moment your ego fights hardest to avoid it. The market kept grinding against me. I felt every tick like a personal insult. Each candle felt like a mirror reflecting my own impatience. I wasn't angry at the market. I was angry at myself. Angry that I knew better and still couldn't stop. That's when I realized something profound about trading. We don't lose because we lack strategy. We lose because we refuse to surrender. Surrender isn't weakness, it's acceptance. And acceptance is the only bridge back to clarity. But I wasn't there yet. I was still spiraling. My mind racing between thoughts. Maybe I can hedge. Maybe I can scalp my way out. Maybe the next candle will save me. It's fascinating how quickly rational intelligence can dissolve under the weight of emotional urgency. When you're in that state, time distorts. Minutes feel like seconds. Seconds feel like decisions. And each decision feels like survival. The second alarm was set to ring later, but at that moment I wished it would come sooner, because I could feel myself slipping further from center, deeper into the emotional vortex where traders become gamblers. I stared at the screen, not seeing candles anymore, just noise, motion, tension. And behind it, all the quiet voice of awareness still trying to break through. It whispered, "You know what's happening. You've seen this before. I did. I'd seen it countless times, not just in my own trading, but in others." The same loop: fear, denial, tilt, self-blame, exhaustion. It's a cycle of self-destruction disguised as perseverance. And in that recognition lies the seed of awakening. But in that moment, recognition wasn't enough. I was still in the battle, and the enemy was not the market. It was me. When the first alarm faded into silence, I felt its echo in my chest, a dull pulse of conscience, ignored, but not forgotten. The market was still moving, but by then I wasn't truly seeing it. I was watching shapes, flashes, colors, my mind constructing stories out of chaos. Every uptick felt like hope. Every downtick a betrayal. And yet somewhere deeper, another layer of awareness began to stir the quiet observer that watches even as you lose yourself. It didn't judge me. It simply noticed you are tilting. Tilt is an interesting word. It sounds mechanical, like a pinball machine locking you out for breaking the rules. But in trading, it's far more human. It's the moment when your emotions override your logic, when you've left the realm of process and entered the realm of identity. You're no longer protecting your account. You're protecting your self-image. I could feel the tension between those two selves, the disciplined trader and the emotional human, stretching inside me like a rubber band pulled to its limit. The rational voice whispered, "Stop." The emotional one shouted, "Just one more trade." And I listened to the wrong voice. It's fascinating how quickly self-deception evolves when money is on the line. I told myself I was calm, that I was following the plan. But my breathing betrayed me. It had turned shallow and fast. My eyes darted across screens searching for confirmation, not truth. That's the thing about the mind in tilt. It doesn't seek information, it seeks validation. You start looking for reasons why you're right, even when the chart is screaming that you're wrong. When the second position began to bleed, I felt the panic rise from my stomach to my throat. It wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing control of the story I was telling myself. The story where I was competent, disciplined, evolving. The market didn't care. It never does. And then, like an answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd said, the second alarm went off. A soft chime, rhythmic, almost kind. It pulled me out of the tunnel for just a breath enough to remember why I'd said it in the first place. 2 alarms, one for awareness, one for surrender. The first was to ask myself, how are you feeling? The second was to ask, if you had no position, what would you do now? That second question has saved me more times than any indicator, because it breaks the emotional continuity of tilt. It forces you to see the market as it is, not as you want it to be. So I stared at the screen, the alarm still echoing in the room, and whispered aloud, if I had no position, would I enter this trade right now? The answer was immediate. No. The clarity of that single word cut through the fog like a blade. For the first time in hours, I could see again the candles, the levels, the price action, not as extensions of my ego, but as neutral facts. And in that clarity came the hardest decision of all, flat. I closed everything, every position, every open wound of the ego. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. There's a specific kind of stillness that descends after you flatten out in tilt, not peace, but absence. It's the sound of your nervous system recalibrating after hours of chaos. You don't feel victorious, you feel hollow. But within that hollowness, there's something sacred, a small pocket of honesty. Because for the first time in the entire session, you are no longer lying to yourself. I sat there staring at the empty screen, hands trembling slightly. My heart rate began to slow, but my mind was still replaying the session like a film on repeat. Every moment of hesitation, every rationalization, every little choice that led to the spiral. That's the anatomy of tilt. It's never a single moment of collapse. It's a chain of micro choices that slowly erode your center. You don't fall all at once, you slide, and the slide always begins with a whisper, I can handle it. But the truth is, you can't handle what you refuse to feel. You can't master what you won't acknowledge. Tilt isn't a technical error, it's an emotional denial. It's the refusal to feel the discomfort of uncertainty, and so you overcompensate by taking control of what shouldn't be controlled. As I sat there, I realized something subtle but profound. I didn't flatten because I lost money. I flattened because I lost presence. Presence, that fragile state of being where attention and awareness merge. It's what allows you to see the market without distortion. And the moment you lose it, every decision becomes a projection of fear. For years, I thought trading psychology was about controlling emotions, about being calm, confident, stoic. But that day taught me it's not about control at all. It's about capacity. The capacity to sit with discomfort, to witness your impulses without obeying them, to feel fear and still remain functional. When you tilt, that capacity collapses. Your nervous system overrides your intellect. You move from the prefrontal cortex to the primal brain, from strategy to survival. And in survival mode, you can't think probabilistically. You can only react. That's why tilt feels like drowning, because you're gasping for control in an environment where control doesn't exist. But the 2 alarms, those small rituals, they were like life buoys. Tiny interruptions in the storm that reminded me to breathe, to return, to remember that I am not my thoughts. That's the essence of trading psychology most people miss. It's not about being emotionless. It's about cultivating the distance to observe your emotions before they become actions. The alarm faded. The room felt still again. I realized my hands were steady now. The market was still moving, candles forming, trends evolving, but for once I didn't feel the urge to chase. I simply watched. And in that watching, something beautiful happened. Time slowed down. The noise became patterns again. The chaos became data. My mind, once scattered, began to reassemble itself around one quiet truth. I am not here to win the market. I am here to understand myself through it. That shift from external battle to internal observation is what transforms trading from gambling into growth. Every tilt is an invitation to know the parts of yourself that still crave control. Every stop out is a mirror showing you where the ego still hides. And when you start to see it that way, the losses hurt less. They become feedback, not punishment. They become teachers. I took a deep breath, closed my notebook, wrote 2 words Tilt recognized. Not mistake, not failure, just recognition. Because awareness is the first step toward integration. The session was over, but the lesson was not. The mind doesn't reset just because the market closes. It lingers, like the echo of a storm after the rain has stopped. You walk away from the screen, but the screen doesn't leave you. That evening I went for a walk. The city lights blurred in the drizzle, the world quiet, except for the sound of tires on wet asphalt. I replayed the day in my mind not to judge it, but to understand the emotional architecture of what had happened. How confidence had slowly turned into conviction. How conviction had mutated into attachment. And how attachment had birthed tilt. The pattern was always the same, only the details changed. As I walked through the night, the sound of the city faded into something softer, almost meditative. The rain had slowed to a mist, and each drop that touched my face felt like a quiet reminder to breathe. There's something about walking after a losing session that strips you of every illusion of control. You are left with nothing but yourself, raw, exposed, honest. And in that honesty, something begins to heal. I thought about how much of trading is really just a mirror for the mind. We come into the market thinking we're here to make money, but what we're really doing is facing every unhealed part of ourselves. The impatience, the fear, the need to be right, the hunger for validation. The market doesn't create these things, it reveals them. It amplifies them like a magnifying glass held over your soul. Every tick, every fluctuation is a test of identity. Do you need to be right, or do you need to see clearly? Do you trust the process, or do you chase the outcome? Do you trade what the market gives, or do you fight for what you wish it would give? That night I realized how often I'd confused composure with control. I used to believe discipline meant never feeling emotion, but that's just repression wearing a mask of professionalism. True discipline is emotional fluency, the ability to feel everything without acting on impulse. When you can sit in the discomfort of uncertainty without trying to escape it, that's when trading becomes meditation. The tilt that day had shown me my limits. It had shown me that awareness alone isn't enough. It must be practiced like a muscle. And those 2 alarms were not just reminders, they were instruments of consciousness. One asked me to check my state. The other asked me to imagine neutrality. Together they formed a bridge between reaction and reflection. It made me wonder how many traders would save their accounts if they simply paused for 30 seconds before clicking again. If they had something to interrupt the feedback loop of ego before it fully ignited. Tilt, after all, is just speed, emotional speed. The mind accelerates faster than awareness can keep up. And the only antidote to speed is space. When I got home, I opened my trading journal, not to log numbers, but to write truth. I wrote about how I felt when the first trade turned, how I rationalized it, how each small compromise became a gateway to chaos. The writing wasn't elegant, it wasn't meant to be. It was a confession, a kind of emotional inventory. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. I hadn't lost to the market, I'd lost to my own resistance to feeling vulnerable. Every trader has a breaking point, but few ever learn where it truly lies. We talk about risk tolerance as a number, a percentage, but in reality it's psychological. It's the amount of emotional pain you can hold before you abandon your system. That day I found my edge of tolerance, and instead of judging it, I decided to study it. Because the edge isn't where we fail, it's where we evolve. Awareness is painful in the moment, but it's profitable in the long run. I thought of all the traders I'd met over the years who quit because they thought they couldn't handle the emotions. But the truth is, no one handles emotions. You feel them. You let them pass through. What destroys you isn't emotion itself, it's identification. When you start believing you are your anger or your fear or your greed, you lose the capacity to choose. The two alarms were in essence reminders of choice. The first said observe, the second said decide. That small gap between observation and decision, that's where mastery lives. As the days passed, I noticed something shift inside me. My sessions became quieter, slower, but sharper. I no longer rushed to prove myself after a loss. I no longer felt the need to predict. Instead, I started listening not to the noise of the market, but to the rhythm of my own mind. There's a kind of intelligence that only appears in stillness. When the mind stops fighting reality, it begins to perceive patterns that were invisible before. I started to notice how each emotional impulse had a physical signature, a tightening of the chest, a drop in the stomach, a sudden urge to act. And once I could recognize those signals, early tilt lost its power. Because tilt doesn't start with a bad trade. It starts with a subtle contraction of awareness. The loss just exposes it. That's when I understood the real function of rituals in trading. Journals, alarms, breathing. They aren't superstitions. They're anchors. Ways to keep awareness tethered when emotion tries to carry it away. In the weeks that followed, I still lost trades, but I didn't lose myself in them. I started ending sessions flat by choice, not by necessity. There's a quiet dignity in that, in walking away while your mind is still calm. And one morning during a particularly volatile open, I noticed something remarkable. My first alarm went off, and instead of ignoring it, I smiled because I didn't need it anymore. I was already aware. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had changed. Not in my strategy, not in my execution, but in my relationship with myself. I had finally stopped treating trading as a performance and started treating it as practice. Practice in awareness, practice in detachment, practice in humility. Because the market doesn't reward intelligence, it rewards alignment. The alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. When those three are in harmony, your trading becomes effortless, not because it's easy, but because you're no longer divided within yourself. I began to see that every tilt, every mistake, every drawdown was simply a lesson. In disguise, a lesson in how to return to balance faster each time. Futures trading is not a test of prediction. It's a test of presence. The NQ, with all its volatility, is like a mirror made of lightning. It reflects back every flicker of fear and every spark of ego. And if you can look into that mirror without flinching, you'll find not just better trades, but a deeper understanding of who you are. When I look back on Case the Row 6 now, I don't see it as failure. I see it as initiation, the day I stopped fighting my emotions and started listening to them. The day I learned that discipline isn't about suppression, it's about awareness. Awareness of when the mind begins to drift. Awareness of when confidence becomes arrogance. Awareness of when patience turns into avoidance. Awareness, the single most valuable currency in the market, because without it, every edge eventually dissolves. So now before I trade, I don't ask, what's my setup? I ask, what's my state? Because the setup might define the opportunity, but the state defines the outcome. That's the essence of this case. Tilt to flat in 2 alarms. Not because I mastered the market, but because I learned to recognize the storm within myself before it consumed me. And that's what I want every trader to understand. The real battle isn't out there on the screen. It's in here in the dialogue between awareness and emotion. If you can win that battle even once, you've already won. And if you lose it again and again, don't despair, because every tilt, every loss, every emotional spiral, it's all pointing you back toward awareness. The alarms, the pauses, the reflections, they're not there to protect your capital. They're there to protect your consciousness. And when consciousness is intact, capital always finds its way back. So the next time you feel the heat rising, the urge to fight the panic, to recover, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself the only question that matters. If I had no position, what would I do now? And when the answer comes, listen to it. Because that voice, calm, quiet, honest, is not just the voice of a disciplined trader. It's the voice of your higher self guiding you home. In the end, it wasn't the loss that changed me. It was the awareness that I was lost. Trading teaches you many things about risk, probability, execution, but its greatest lesson is about surrender, the kind that doesn't mean giving up, but giving in to reality. Each tilt, each breakdown, each moment of emotional chaos, it isn't punishment. It's a message, a reminder that before you can master the market, you must first master the mind that meets it. So if today's story resonated with you, if you've ever stared at the screen and seen your reflection looking back, remember the real profit isn't in the trade you win, but in the awareness you keep. This was Case number 6, Futures NQ, Tilt to Flat in 2 alarms. You've been listening to Mind Over Markets. Stay present. Trade consciously. And until next time, keep your mind in the market, but never let the market own your mind.